A warm welcome to each and every one of you. A special welcome to Dr. Margaret Das for being present today to share her knowledge with us. A warm welcome also to our professors who are with us. We thank you all for the trouble that you've taken to be with us. Thank you very much for joining us. And we also welcome the others who are joining us this evening. I wouldn't want to waste much time and I'll pass on this to Dr. Hunsan to introduce our speaker.
Greetings, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are connecting from. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Margaret Das, who will talk to us about teaching or learning. What's your goal? This is a subject which we academics and educators should all be deeply interested because it's changing the learning design. We can best ensure that future generation to take on complex challenges to provide a better world for everyone. Dr. Das was a brilliant student while she was at MCC, and she's a brilliant person herself, and was a topper in both her bachelor's and then master classes. She switched to human genetics in her MPhil, and she did that in Taramani Institute, and then did medical microbiology at University of Texas Medical Branch, Galveston for her PhD. Did excellent research at the NIH in signal transduction, served as an assistant professor, Department of Biology, Southern Connecticut State University, New Havens. And now she's an accomplished content writer with MedIQ. She pursues her passion in education, specializing in learning design. I had the privilege of teaching her and her classmates in horticulture and plant physiology and a Bachelor of Science, in BSc. And I know I partnered with Dr. Anand and enjoyed teaching the horticulture course. She did excellent there. She used to be very good at designing the landscape. So she was into designing even when she was a student. Taught experimental embryogeny, tissue culture, plant physiology, and biochemistry in her master's. And her classmates also together. It was an honor to introduce her. And one more thing is she was the final master's batch I taught in MCC before I left my teaching career from MCC. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming home Dr. Margaret Das after a whopping 30 long years, or more than 30 years. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Das to give the presentation. Take it away, Margaret.
Thank you very much, Dr. Samuel, for that introduction. I'm blushing here. But yes, it's been over 30 years, and it's really nice to be able to see some faces. I can see only a few of you, but I see Dr. Dayanand in there. But it's been really nice. Yeah, I started off with botany. My interest was in genetics, which is why my bachelor's and master's theses were in genetics, and I went on to do my MPhil in genetics. And then I moved on to microbiology and immunology and did my research there. And then I made a career switch. And what I do now is continuing medical education for physicians. So what I do now is develop education for practicing physicians, and particularly on risk management. And there was when I started off with this interest in effective learning, essentially, because one of the things that they will tell you is that, we've been educating our physicians on these issues for so long, but the practice doesn't change. And so we still have the same adverse events. And so that was one thing, to make sure that what we are teaching actually translates into practice. And that was one reason why I became interested in in learning design. The other was to see that, I mean, you're putting all this education forward, but is it actually making a difference? And you have to have some way to evaluate that. And the other thing is, what is the best way to design education so that the people who are hearing it will actually accept it and understand it and then convert it into practice. So those were some of the reasons why I became interested in it, essentially from the selfish reason of doing my job better. But it's become something that I really enjoy. Before I go any further, I'm going to mute everybody just so that the experience is good for all of us and to conserve bandwidth. I'm also going to take off my video to conserve bandwidth to make sure that things come through. And okay, so mute all over here. Oops. Sorry, I'm trying to mute a few people who didn't work. Okay, here we go. And mute my video. Let me see if I can mute my video. Oops.
Margaret, we couldn't hear you. You are muted. You are muted.
Okay,
Margaret,
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear
you
you.
hear me?
Sorry
Yes.
You self-muted yourself too. So.
Okay, all right. All right. So did you miss the last thing when I was saying thank you to everybody?
I know we didn't. Yeah, so I think you got when you muted everyone, everybody got muted. So
okay, so I was just
including
saying
yourself. Yes.
Okay,
You
I
should
was saying
start with
thank
this.
you. Okay, I'll say thank you to everybody for all those who are present here today. It is an honor for me to have my previous professors be present. And one of the things I say is that I've been very fortunate to have had very good teachers, when I was in elementary school and later, and then to have had very good professors who were knowledgeable and caring and forward thinking, I think. And one of the reasons why I'm always trying to learn and do things and have a can-do attitude is because of what I saw in my professors. So I'm always grateful to all of you, and I'm really grateful that some of you are here today. Okay. So with that, I am going to go on to my next slide. So just to get us started, I know we are all over, and I just ask you to use the chat function and let us know where you are calling in from today. I am actually in the northeast corner of the US in Connecticut. I know Dr. Samuel is actually, he works in Iowa, and today he's in Indiana. Oh, I see we have somebody from Pennsylvania. We have somebody from Bhubaneswar. Okay, oh, Madras. Sorry, I still say Madras. I find it really strange to say Chennai when I'm speaking in English. Tambaram, oh, Dr. Daya, oh, okay, Lincoln, Nebraska, okay, Madurai, Cuttack. So we are all over. And by the way, as we go through, you will see this little chat icon come up again. Oh, somebody from Muscat. So you'll see this icon come up, and when you see that, please feel free to use the chat at other times. Okay. Okay, so today I have two learning objectives for today's webinar session. And I hope that when we finish, that each of you will be able to discuss the value of designing courses with the end in mind, and also how you will know how to use the ADDIE process of learning design. And as scientists, we intuitively do some of these things, so you're probably going to think that some of it is very familiar. But what learning design gives us is a framework and a process so that you can do it more systematically. And if you do that, then it'll assist you as you revise courses and eventually maybe even get you to a point where you can choose the appropriate methods and the design for whatever you intend. And the other thing, I'm going to introduce you to the ADDIE process, and I'll give you some examples as we go through as well. I'll try to do academic setting, but please know that the ADDIE designing process and learning design in general is applicable to any age group, any setting, whether academic or professional development or informal learning, any topic, any subject, and any type of delivery method, whether it's in person or online, whatever it is, you can use the learning design process. And whether you're teaching a master's level course or kindergarten or teaching somebody to play basketball, you can use the learning design process. Okay? And I would, okay, so let's go on from here. Give me a second. I'm going to try to turn off my video just to conserve bandwidth. And for some reason, it's not letting me. Okay, there we go. Oops. Okay. So before we start, I would like each of you to think about a course that you would like to either develop or revise. If not a course, think about something that you like to teach a group of people. And as we discuss various aspects of learning design, try to relate it to your course. Then it'll be easier to understand and you can make the connection to your needs. I've provided a worksheet for you to use. It was shared earlier, and if you don't have it with you, Dr. Lawrence is going to share it in the chat again so that you can download it and have it with you. So if you can either have a printed copy that you can write on or have it up on your device, as we go through, you should be able to follow along on that worksheet. And this worksheet, we'll use it today during the webinar, but it's also something that you can use later when you're trying to design a course or revise a course. So right now, think about a course that you would like to design, revise, just have it in your mind. And if you have the worksheet handy, just write down the name. And also everywhere that you see this icon later in the webinar, that'll be a clue to you that there is something that you can write down in your worksheet. Okay? And the course that you think about can be anything, Dr. Lawrence, can you post the worksheet in the chat, please? Or if you don't have it, if any of the somebody else has it handy, could you just share it? It looks like someone doesn't have the worksheet. So it could be how to ride a bike, or how to use a particular algorithm, or how to make slides for a presentation. So whatever it is that you want it to be, you can do that. Okay. So let's start with a polling question. All right, so you should see a poll that has popped up on your screen, and it is, what is your level of familiarity with or knowledge of learning design? And you can just check, click wherever it is that you feel you fall in this list. I see several of you have answered. I'll give you a few more minutes. We have about 23, we have 23 people on the call, and about half of you have responded. Okay, we've slowed down. So I'm gonna end the polling now and share the results. So most people fall within the range. If you've sort of heard about it, you've used it a little bit, and you're somehow knowledgeable about it. And that's pretty much what most people feel when they get to the, when we ask about learning design. Okay. The reason I asked this was just to get a feel for where we are and as a group. And I think this webinar would be interesting, I think, and I hope when we get to the end of it that you'll know a little bit more about it. Okay, so the first goal that I talked about was I wanted everybody to know the importance of beginning with the end in mind. And what do I mean by begin with the end in mind? So the most important reason is to ensure that the outcome for your students is what you intend. So begin with the end in mind is a fundamental principle of design. So you have to decide before you start anything what the goal is for that course or for that teaching experience. Whatever it is, you have to know the goal first. And that will ensure that your students will end up where you want them to be. And another way of referring to this is as backwards design. Maybe that's something you've heard. But this provides direction and structure for the course. And every decision that you make is weighed against that goal. And it ensures that all the necessary information is included and very little that is extraneous. So it's always what the student or the learner needs to know, and it's not a data transfer. And that's something that subject matter experts tend to do. You know, we have all this knowledge in our heads and we're so excited about it. And we want whoever we are teaching to know everything. And so we give them a whole lot of information. So for an example, think about if you were teaching a horticulture course. What is it that your students need to know? Do they need to know the history of every tool that you're using? So maybe you have this very nice tractor that you want to use, that they're going to use to plow up the field. Do they need to know how we came to obtain that tractor or the history of the development of the tractor? No, what they need to know is how to use the tractor to plow the field. So that's the difference between giving students the information they need and all the information that you're excited about, right? So, so your goals then will give you some structure and help you to decide what information you need. On the other hand, they probably need to know the 5 different tools that'll make it easier for them to do their job, or the 5 essential tools that they cannot do without. So that's information you probably want to give them. And goals. So every element of the course must move you and the learner towards the goal. So that's why we say determine the goal first. If it's professional development, very often we'll do what's called a gap analysis. So say you're teaching somebody a new process, you'll then think about what is the current state, what are people doing now? And what would you like them to be able to do when they complete the course, and that becomes your gap analysis. And you can have goals for the program, and then from that you develop goals for each of your courses, and then from the courses for every unit. So maybe for a bachelor's degree, you may have a goal of you want all your students to become successful professionals, able to teach botany or able to do research. And then you would have different goals within them. And say you were thinking about teaching anatomy. The goals for a first-year bachelor student anatomy course would be very different from the goals for a master's level anatomy course. And so that would then distinguish the content of each of those courses. But it also, if you want your students to be able to design experiments and submit grants and be successful in research, then during the in your various courses and through the program, you would have to give them opportunities to learn how to do that. So I hope this gives you an understanding of why you need to have the goals and how everything that you do would line into that. The other thing to remember with your goals is that they should be specific, measurable, so you can know whether they've been achieved, achievable, and realistic. You know, what the goal you set for your first years is very different from what you set for your MPhil or PhD students. And then timely, so what they actually need. The other thing that you should know is that when you have goals, then it will actually help you to design courses that are based on standards, and then your instructional strategies and everything will help you assess at the end and make sure to show you how you meet those standards. Okay, so why use a systematic learning design approach? One, of course, if it's outcomes based, it begins with an understanding of the knowledge and skills that students must learn and demonstrate upon completion. And the systems thinking is to indicate, I'm sorry. Okay, systems thinking is to let you know that when you change one of the components, the others change as well. So there are three reasons to have a systems approach. One is that the focus from the outset is what learners have to know or to be able to do. And it's a very powerful tool. Sorry, I need to stop and mute. Okay. It's a very powerful tool for planning standards-based instruction because of the tight alignment between outcomes, student characteristics, learning, instructional activities, and the assessment. And it's also a replicative process. You can be evaluated and scaled and revised, and you'll know exactly what to do. So I hope at this point you realize the importance of beginning with the end in mind. And now I'm going to move forward for us to think about ADDIE, the process that I'm going to introduce you to. There are several different models of learning design, but we'll talk about ADDIE today, which is a foundational model, and just about any other model that you can think about will be, you can wrap it into ADDIE. Some of them are more elaborate and very appropriate for people who are starting out. And an example of that would be the Dick and Carey model. And some others are very good for fast-paced environments. And one of those would be the rapid prototyping model, where you constantly revise and implement. So ADDIE is an acronym for analyze, design, develop, implement, evaluate. Those are the stages, and evaluate actually happens everywhere. So we're going to start then with the very first step, which is analyze. I'm going to deploy another poll now. If you would please answer, here we go. If you could please respond to this poll about the type of courses that you develop. Is it for bachelor's undergraduate students or graduate students, MPhil, professional development, or informal learning? Maybe you teach, maybe you coach a basketball team or a chess team or a cricket or whatever other thing. You teach somebody cooking or knitting or, there's so many other things that you can teach others. So whatever places you actually do your teaching. And it's just a reminder that you can use the learning design process in just about any setting. I think we have, well, half of you have. I'll give you a couple more seconds for the rest of you to chime in. Okay, we have more than 50%. Just 2 more seconds. Right, I'm going to end the polling now and share the results. And there you see. So we have people teaching primarily undergraduate students, but also plenty of graduate students and even professional development. And it's good to see that you're using informal learning. And a lot of us do informal learning. Okay, we teach. So what I showed you just now about finding out what your audience is, that's one of the things you do during analysis, determining your audience. But here are the things that you will do during analysis. Sometimes analysis is called front-end analysis. It's one of the most important steps because if you don't do enough of it, you'll go back and you'll be revising multiple times. So here are a few things to consider. And by the way, you'll see that icon at the top for your notes. So if you have your worksheet open, feel free to take notes for your course. What are the goals for your course? That's the very first thing you'll know. And then you have to see the gap. Or what is it that you want people to know? What is the ideal state and how do you get there? In the work that we do, I can tell you, just a couple of weeks ago, I was designing a course. I was told what the audience was. I had 2 cases. This was for physicians, obviously. And I was told that it is all physicians, all specialties. So I came up with 2 case outlines. One was for hospitalists, people who practice in the hospital, and then another one for obstetricians. And we went there, we went to the client, we were sharing this, and they said, and I had for gastroenterologists, and they said, oh, we don't have gastroenterologists. And can you give us something for obstetricians? So now I'm there revising the course. And that was because the information that came to me was incorrect. So that's really important to know who your audience is. You have to know the scope of, your project as well. And the scope can be many different things. You have to think about whether you are in your first class that students are getting on a topic, the depth of information that they need. So going back to that first example, your bachelor students' anatomy class does not need the depth of information that your master's or your MPhil students need. Or even if you're teaching them, if you're doing experiments, in one case, they just need to follow a protocol and do an experiment. On the other hand, you may want them to actually design their own experiments. So that's something to do with the scope of your thing. And then you need to think about the constraints. What are the guardrails, in a sense, for your course? What are the barriers that you may face? So if you are teaching physiology and you have an experiment that is looking at the effect of sunlight on something, but your course is held at night, or it is a course that is indoors and you have the ability to go outdoors to do that experiment. This actually takes me back to my days at MCC where we used to do experiments in the hot sun outside. But if you cannot go outside, then how are you going to do this experiment? You have to think about that when you're designing the experiment and the course. Maybe you have to have lights indoors, right? Daylight, sunlight, lights. So those are the kinds of things you need to think about before you start designing your course. And then who's your target audience? That poll I did just now, looking at who are we teaching? And before this, the very first poll we did about what types of courses do you design, all that was to help me understand something about you. So you're thinking about your audience. Your first year students, what information do they come into this course with? Or your second year students, what have they already learned during the first year? All those things. And if it's informal learning, you have a mixture of students. Maybe you want to teach cricket and you have 7-year-olds and you have 14-year-olds. And what is the motivation for each? And when you have a heterogeneous age group, it's a very different approach to learning compared to when everybody's the same age or at the same level. So those are things you need to think about for your audience. And that's something we face, in the work I do. I have fresh, recently graduated physicians, and then we have those who've been practicing for 50 years. Very different approaches, not only to education, but also to the knowledge that they have and their acceptance of education. So those are things you need to consider. And then what resources are available to you and to your students? Do you have a library? Do they have access to a library? Do you have access to a library? What's your budget? Do you have anybody assisting you? So the time available for you and for them. So those are things you need to consider as well. Delivery method. Is it online, face-to-face, live, asynchronous, in-person, whatever it is, small groups, all the things to think about. And then the people who are involved in developing. Very often we have a person who designs and delivers the education. But do you have access to others whom you can talk to while you're developing the course? Do you have access to somebody while doing the course? Do you have other people who will be delivering the course? So those are things to think about. And even if you don't have a subject matter expert assigned to the course, you can informally do that. I think, you can talk to a colleague, you can run things through by them. So those are, it's always nice to have somebody else you can talk to about some things. So just consider people whom you can build around you. With all that information that you have with your analysis, you're going to take that and then you're going to the design phase. So the decisions of the course are made based on the information that you gleaned. And in the design phase, the very first thing you have to do is write the learning objectives for your course. So feel free to write objectives for your course that you have in mind, or think about an objective. So whatever you think that your learners should be able to do or know at the end of the course, upon completion of the course, those are your learning objectives. And then think about, how will you know that the learners have actually achieved the learning objectives? How can they demonstrate to you that they have met the learning objectives? Those are your assessments. And then you need to think about, what do your learners need in order to achieve the learning objectives? That becomes all the content, your lectures, the papers you give them, the videos you ask them to watch, all the learning practice things, all that comes in. And what I have as practice activities are all the exercises that you make them do, the homework that you have them do, the discussions that you have in your class, the games you may play, the experiments you do, all that, the projects, all those are your activities. And practice is very important. And tied to the practice is the feedback that you give them. It's something we do very well in science, especially in the lab. I remember, we would make slide sections. We were supposed to find some structure or the other, and we would have it. And then we would have somebody, we would go there and ask them to come and look at it. We had 2 or 3 professors in the room, and we'd ask them, they'd come and look at it, and they would tell us, oh, your section is too thick, and that's why you can't see anything. Or, that's just a piece of dirt, clean up your slide a little more. Or they'd say, oh yeah, that's right. So that feedback, instant, immediate, very specific feedback. Don't tell them, oh, that's good. Doesn't help the person at all. Or that's bad, do it again. Doesn't help. Be very specific with your feedback. The section is too thick. Your light is not adjusted correctly. Try a higher magnification. There's too much stain here. Going back to horticulture, this plant needs more shade and you planted it in full sun. Or this plant got too much water, you overwatered it. Whatever it is, be very specific with your feedback. And remember to praise. Praise is what builds up students and lets them do it. Active learning. There's a question here asking about how much of active learning component do you incorporate in your courses? Yes, there's a lot of active learning. Active learning can take many different forms. What we're doing right now with your worksheet, where I'm asking you to write down and think about your course and then write things down as we go, that is part of active learning. Having discussions in your classes, that's active learning. With science, obviously, we have our labs, so practicals, that's active learning. Having projects, that's active learning. Anything that lets your learner interact with the material is active learning. So that's part of it. Or if you can also do this thing of flipping the classroom, right? Have them go out, read all the information, learn everything instead of you lecturing. Let them go find out all the information. And then when you come to class, all you're doing is discussion and projects and so forth. And then, of course, the course evaluation and then accessibility. You also have to think about accessibility. If anybody has a reading, their level of understanding of whatever language it is that you're using, think about their proficiency in that language, whether anyone has hearing impairment or visual impairment or access to the internet. If you're using online, what is the access to the internet or to a device? So those are some of the things you have to consider. I remember doing gram stains once, looking through this, and I had a student who said, I'm colorblind. You're asking me to distinguish based on color and I can't. So I had to go beside him. We looked at it. We found another way to do it. So some of the things to think about. So I just want to give you an example. And in the worksheet, you'll actually find a table there that which is to align your learning objectives, the content, the activities, and the assessment. And I just want to give you an example here. What you see on your slide is a gram stain slide of bacteria. The pink rods are gram-negative bacteria, and the purple cocci, the circles, are gram-positive bacteria. So if I were writing an objective for this, so the first thing is to write an objective. This is what I would say. Following the protocol, make a gram stain slide to clearly distinguish gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. What I have followed here is a process for writing objectives, which says that objectives have 3 parts: what the learner will be able to do, the conditions under which the learner carries out the task, and the criteria to evaluate learner performance. So what is it that the learner will do? Make a gram stain slide. The conditions, using the protocol. And the criteria for evaluation is to clearly distinguish gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. So that's the objective. Here's my assessment. 2 slides each of gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. That's what they're going to submit. And then 1 slide with mixed bacteria. And I put that mixed bacteria because, you know, sometimes when you have them separately, you don't see as much. So for this, what do you think the content would be? We've told them what the learning objective is, and you have the assessment. If you were designing this, what would your content be? Please use the chat and tell me what you think the content should be. Anybody? Look at the objective. It sort of tells you what you have to do. The topic, okay, so the topic here is what they're going to do is make a gram-negative slide. So if you, what do your learners need? What do your students need if this was your classroom? Okay, you have to describe the difference between gram-negative and gram-negative, gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria. What else? What are you going to provide them? Staining method, yeah. The materials, good. Okay, so here it is. So what you are going to give them is the gram stain protocol. And under that, yes, you would have specimens, everything they need, the microscopes, all the material you need for that. And a demonstration of the protocol. Demonstration is very important. So a demonstration of the protocol. And then examples of stained bacteria. If you want, for whatever you want them to do, you have to show them what the finished product would look like. So they'll have a reference point. And then the activity itself, you know, you demonstrate, and then they're going to practice making the slides. This is where you provide feedback, and to the point where they can distinguish between the two. And then, of course, they would be able to be assessed. And please remember, whatever your assessment is, it should be tied to your learning objective. So you demonstrate, you practice, you set. So if you have a project, then, or if you want somebody to write an essay, then you have to teach them how to write the essay. And then whatever you assess is how well they write the essay or how well they design the experiment, you know, whatever it is, it has to be tied to that. Once you have your design complete, then you go into develop. That's the next stage. This is where you develop the course according to the design. That's really important. So you select your textbooks, your journal articles, whatever existing material, or you may have to develop your own. You write the quizzes and the exams, and develop rubrics if you're going to. I'll talk about rubrics in a second for teacher, and then if you have any tests, you have to develop all the tests that you need, the pre-test, the post-test, everything together. And in the process of developing, you'd probably want to do a little bit of pilot testing, you know, to validate all that you're doing. And this is where you may want to go back to a colleague. You may not have the luxury of actually pilot testing it with a small group. But if you cannot, you know, ask a colleague, ask a senior colleague or somebody who's a subject matter expert to go over what you've done and see whether the materials you've picked out are appropriate. Ask someone who's not a subject matter expert to look at some of the tests you've written and the material activities and see if it makes sense for them, if it flows well, if the instructions are understandable and clear. So just to have somebody else look at it, at least, so they'll know. And this formative evaluation is an important part of it. If you're not able to do a pilot test, which is usually done with a small group from your target audience, then, you know, just get into this continuous improvement mindset so that every time you give the course to your students, after it's done, you enter some self-reflection, get some feedback from them, and improve your course. I want to go back to rubrics for a second. I don't know how familiar you are with rubrics. Please chat in whether you've used rubrics or if it's something you use or not. But rubrics are something that promote self-efficacy and self-assessment for students. You can use it with elementary school students. You can use it at high school students, college students, professional development, especially if you don't have, if you are doing something like a project, if it's discussions, for all those, a rubric is very useful. It promotes self-assessment and self-efficacy, but it also makes it very easy for you to grade whatever it is. So what I'm showing here is one row, actually. This rubric was about 3 pages long because it was for our capstone project. And it was a project where at the end we designed, implemented the project and submitted reports that were about 30 pages long. And therefore the executive summary was very important. But this is a very elaborate rubric because it was part of a master's course. And this was a graded assignment. Students had to pass with the B or higher, which is 80% or higher. And it was a required course for earning our master's degree. So it had to be this specific. You may want to, for projects, and if you're for reports, you may also include something like the formatting that you want to use. Because if you want to train your students to be able to write manuscripts that they will submit to journals, you can have the style guide and tell them you need to use the style guide from this particular journal. So those are things that you want to think about. So here's another rubric. This one was for a professional development course within our company. They needed to know something and we were doing it. This was part of a discussion and we just said, acceptable and acceptable. But we did give them certain criteria to use. And so rubrics can be as specific and detailed or as generic as you want. But they're very useful for everybody. And if you have multiple people grading exams, or if you have multiple sections of a course taught by different people, rubrics are very good for ensuring that every student has the same experience, the same kind of grading. The next step is implementation. This is essentially showtime. This is when you train your instructors, you deliver the course, you collect and distribute all your evaluations. And oops. So that's the final part of your course itself. After that comes evaluation. So let's do our next polling question here. And just have a poll, very quick poll. Sorry, we're going a little longer than I wanted. Very quick poll. How often do you evaluate your courses? Okay, so I'm going to end the poll. Share your results. So we have some people who evaluate the course every time it's offered, some occasionally. All right. And for the next one, I'm actually going to ask you to respond via chat as to what do you think is the purpose of an evaluation? Would you please use the chat and tell me what you think the purpose of an evaluation is? I don't see any responses. Okay, to give personalized feedback, to measure student comprehension. how far the message has gone across to students. Okay, to understand my knowledge, one indicator of whether the learning objective is met, to check the understanding, to measure the learning objectives, to how well the learning objectives, okay. An assessment of myself as well as the course that I'm teaching, how effective the tutor is. Okay, so an evaluation is actually different from assessment. So the purpose of an evaluation is to determine the effectiveness of the course design, the materials, and the learning environment. And yes, to determine how well your course design helped your students meet the learning objectives. But it is the effectiveness of the design and the materials and the learning environment, everything that you put together. It is not an evaluation of the students or the instructor. The assessments that you do assess the students, but the evaluation is of the course itself, of the design and everything that you did. So just keep that in mind. There are two forms of evaluation, two types. One is formative evaluation, which happens during development. Remember, we talked about the pilot testing, about running things through others, getting a second pair of eyes on things. So that's what it is. And during formative evaluation, which happens during development, it's the subject matter experts, learners, and the user experience. Particularly for online courses, you want to think about user experience. The summative evaluation, which happens after implementation, the feedback is provided by your learners or your participants. Well, so the key points to remember, so define the goals for your course. Start with the end in mind. Don't neglect your analysis. And first of all, decide what you want your learners to know. That is, write measurable learning objectives. Determine how you will measure the learning. And then identify resources, evaluate, and then always design from the learner's perspective, not the instructor's. Don't think about what you are going to teach. Think about what you want your learners to learn, to be able to know or do when they complete the course. Here's our final poll. Now that we have gone through this, I want you to take a moment and think about, from all that we have done, learned today, what do you think? What is one or maybe two things that you can do with the courses that you are designing now or revising now, that you're teaching now? What is something that you can do? And I say don't choose more than three because, you know, it's good to start small. It's often not possible to do everything together. I see a hand up, someone who wants to talk, and I'm going to give you, just give me a second and let me start. Okay, I'm going to end this polling and share it with you just so you can see. It's a good start, and I hope all of you will just write down what you have written now, what you think. This is your commitment to change, your intent to practice your change. And it's a powerful tool. You know, if you commit to something, you express your intent, we are more likely to do something. So that's where I hope you will write it down and you will try to do that. Okay. Okay, so that's ADDIE for you. And it says, let ADDIE help you design or revise your next course. We do, thank you very much for your attention. It took a little longer than I wanted. I have about 5 minutes for discussion. So if anybody has any questions, please let me know. Okay, I am going to allow everybody to unmute themselves. So if you want to speak, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question. I have about 5 minutes. Sorry, I'm actually scheduled to take my first dose of my COVID vaccine, so I have to but yeah. Someone asked if we'll have access to the slides. Sure, I can pass them on to Pastor Noel, and he can give those to you. The other thing I wanted to say is if you're designing courses, you do that table. If you want me to take a look at it, feel free. I'd be happy to look over anybody's table. Thanks, Dr. Dar. Anybody have a question? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Any questions? Okay.
Yeah,
All right.
I have a
Go
question.
ahead.
This
Sure.
rapid prototyping model that
Yes.
you talked about, I have heard about prototyping, but it is more in an engineering perspective. I have not come across it from the educational perspective because I didn't find this material online at all, you know.
So rapid prototyping is a process that's used very often for online learning, especially, and when you have developers and things. And essentially, it means that you put it together, you deploy it, get the feedback, and then you revise. And you do this multiple times. And especially when you have a very short turnaround, it's a very good process to use. You will still be going through all these phases of ADDIE, but you will do it very quickly, and your formative evaluation is actually wrapped into this thing of giving it to your learners and getting it back and going cycling through that. I can send you, I think in the worksheet that I gave you under the additional resources, there are 2 references there for rapid prototyping, if you want to take a look at that. Anything else?
Yeah, Maggie, can I ask a question?
I don't know who it is, but please go ahead.
Yeah, Maggie, this is Ravichandran, your classmate.
Oh, okay.
MSc.
Go ahead.
Anyway, yes. See, this kind of, course designing and teaching learning process, it is familiar with students who have, easy access or good institutions, right? But, take for instance, students who are in cities and well-developed places, they are exposed to such kind of teaching and learning process. But if you look at the students in India and many of the rural backgrounds, does the curriculum or the structure of the curriculum has this kind of modules for teaching learning process? If you look at that word, probably it is not. But it happens only in affluent kind of society or places where this has been in practice for some time. So that is the reason why in India, like CBCS students and international curriculum students, they are well off with this practice, and they cope up very easily when they move to colleges and higher educations. So my question is it possible to implement this one at school level at all kinds of places?
Yes. Yes. The thing is, this is not something the student is doing. This is something the teacher or the instructor is doing. You are doing it. So regardless of what your institution says, yes, they ask you to teach a curriculum. And that's why I said, if you have standards-based or if you have a curriculum and you need to make sure that you cover that curriculum, learning design is your friend. ADDIE can help you, or any other one that you want to use, because you can make sure that you cover everything that you are required to do. The onus is on the teacher to make sure that it happens. And the students, and what you're doing is designing a course that is appropriate for your students with the resources available to you and your students. It has nothing to do with what your students have to, what they have. It is what you are doing to make sure that the learning occurs. So it's not about, and it's not even something that's mandated to you. So where I work, we did not have a learning design process. But out of my interest, I started it. And even though I'm not required to go through this, and I don't, for every project, for every course I design, I don't have the full worksheet. I go through it in my mind. And everybody in my company, it's there. It's kind of a standing joke. If you ask Margaret to do something, she's going to ask you 100 questions. That's me going through my analysis without even writing it down. So that's something you can do, and make sure you have all the information before you start. And then with your resources, we are always told, this is all the money you have. This is all the time you have. These are the textbooks you have. So those are your constraints, but you have to fulfill your learning objectives. And how are you going to do it? So that's your thinking process and how you design your course. See?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Margaret.
You're welcome. Anybody else?
Yeah, Leslie, I think the present COVID condition where we are shifting from the normal teaching mode to the online mode, I think this sort of self-realization could make much impact. Otherwise, we always crib that there is enough time, there's not much of technological things which are done. So I think if you can evaluate your usage of time as well as the tools, we can evaluate and also have a better reach, I think.
If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer. Just send it through either the group or send it through Pastor Noel or Dr. Ponsamal or someone, and I will. But other than that, you guys can, obviously all of you can continue with your discussion, but I just need to end if you don't mind, so I can start.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Margaret Das, for all the effort that you've taken. It was really something, a new concept. The static concept was really new to many of us, and we're thankful to you. We'd like to, before we close, I request Ms. Professor Leslie Lawrence to close with the
Closing prayer. Everlasting God, who is the embodiment of all truth and who alone knows how we can be equipped for your purposes, and who alone can grant us the gift to serve this world better. Grant us the favor of blessing those students who have gone out from among us to serve in the wider arena of life outside the college walls. Strengthen them to meet victoriously all temptations. Enable them for the faithful performance of their life work, to pass on their skills and knowledge more effectively, and that they may be without fear to follow steadfastly where duty, morals, and honor lead. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Those who are in a hurry to leave can leave. Others can still interact for a short while.
Thank you all very much. I really appreciate this opportunity.